Supply management is not on the table. Period. Full stop. Mark Carney answered the question in French. A deliberate signal sent to Quebec, where the dairy industry employs thousands of families, where the supply management system is politically sacred. While Washington put forward 5 demands to extend the most important trade agreement on the continent, Canada refused each one. Not stubbornness, strategy, because every demand Trump made reveals something Washington desperately needs from Canada, and Carney knows exactly what it is. Today, we will show you exactly how Trump's 5 demands accidentally exposed how dependent the United States truly is on Canada, why each refusal makes Canada stronger instead of weaker, how the trade agreement review is turning into a chess match where Carney holds more pieces than anyone in Washington expected, and why the United States walking away from this deal would hurt American workers, American consumers, and American manufacturers far more than anyone in the Trump administration wants to admit. But before we dive into this story, if you appreciate in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the stories that truly matter. United States Trade Representative Jameson Greer stood before Congress. He laid out exactly what Washington wants. No guessing, no rumors. A clear public list of conditions Canada must meet for the trade agreement to be extended for another 16 years. Demand number 1. Dairy. The United States wants expanded access to Canada's dairy market. Right. Now, American dairy producers can ship limited volumes into Canada tariff-free. Anything above that cap gets hit with tariffs between 200 and 298%. Greer called Canada's supply management system unfair, said it restricts American producers from competing on equal footing. Carney's response came the very next day. Canada passed legislation in June making this commitment permanent. Not a promise law. Greer can demand all he wants. The door is legally locked. Demand number 2, digital media. The Online Streaming Act brought Netflix, Spotify, YouTube, and every other streaming platform under Canadian broadcasting rules. They have to invest a percentage of their revenue into Canadian content. The Online News Act requires platforms to pay Canadian publishers when they link to or republish news stories. Greer called both laws discriminatory against American tech companies, said they create barriers that hurt United States digital service providers. Canada's position is simple. Those laws protect Canadian culture, Canadian voices, Canadian journalism. They exist because without them, American platforms would flood Canadian markets and drown out domestic content entirely. Carney has shown no willingness to touch either law because dismantling them would mean surrendering cultural sovereignty to Silicon Valley. That is not a trade Canada is willing to make. Demand number 3. Provincial alcohol bans. Several Canadian provinces banned American beer and wine in direct retaliation for Trump's tariffs. Ontario, British Columbia, others joined. Greer wants those bans lifted as a condition of extending the agreement. Here is what Washington missed. Those bans exist because Trump imposed tariffs first. Remove the tariffs, the bans disappear. But Greer is demanding Canada remove the bans while the tariffs stay in place. That is not negotiation. That is demanding Canada absorb punishment without fighting back. Carney will not agree to that. The bans stay until the tariffs come down. Demand number 4, government procurement. Greer flagged what he called discriminatory procurement measures in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. Provincial governments buying Canadian products instead of American ones. Greer wants those policies changed, but procurement rules are not a trade violation. Every government in the world buys domestically when it can. The United States does it constantly by American Act. Made in America requirements on military contracts. Federal procurement preferences for domestic suppliers on everything from steel to software. Washington demanding Canada stop buying. Stop. Canadian, while maintaining its own Buy American policies, is not a legitimate trade grievance. It is hypocrisy dressed up as a negotiation demand. Demand number 5. Energy policy. Greer raised Alberta's treatment of electrical power distribution providers in Montana. The allegation is that Alberta's grid operator favors in-province energy generation over cross-border imports from the United States during certain periods. Alberta's utilities minister rejected the claim entirely, said there is no differential treatment. But the bigger energy story runs in the opposite direction. The United States imports roughly 3.8 million barrels of Canadian crude oil every day. 23% of American refinery feedstock comes from Canada. GF Coast refineries were engineered specifically to process Canadian heavy sour crude. New England states depend on Canadian electricity to keep the lights on during winter peaks. The energy relationship does not flow one way, it flows both ways, and Canada's share of that flow is irreplaceable. Here is what most analysis gets wrong about this situation. Everyone assumes saying no to 5 demands weakens Canada's position, makes Canada look uncooperative, gives Trump ammunition to threaten withdrawal. But Carney is not just saying no. He is saying no while holding cards Washington needs desperately. Think about what each demand actually reveals. Trump wants dairy access expanded. That means American dairy producers are struggling to compete in global markets and need Canadian consumers to make up the difference. Trump wants digital media laws changed. That means American tech companies are watching billions in revenue disappear because Canada requires local investment. Trump wants procurement rules changed. That means Canadian governments are successfully keeping money in the domestic economy instead of sending it to Washington. Every single demand is an admission that Canada is doing something right, something that benefits Canadians at the expense of Americans. Greer just published the list of Canadian policies that are working effectively, and Carney's job is to protect every single one of them. The demand list stopped short of the biggest issue in North American trade, automobiles. And that silence tells you everything. The North American auto industry is deeply integrated across the border. Canadian factories build components that go into American trucks. American factories build engines that go into Canadian sedans. Supply chains cross the border dozens of times before a finished vehicle rolls off the assembly line. Major automakers testified before Congress that the trade agreement is essential to their operations. The American Automotive Policy Council, representing the Detroit Three, said the agreement accounts for tens of billions of dollars in annual savings through regional integration. General Motors. President Mark Ryu said supply chains go through all 3 countries, and the complexity is enormous. Trump imposed Section 232 tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos, disrupted the very integration that American manufacturers depend on anyway. Now, those same manufacturers are begging the administration not to let the agreement expire, because without it, tariffs become permanent. And the integrated supply chains keeping American auto plants running start falling apart. Carney knows this. That is why the auto sector is Canada's hidden leverage. Not dairy, not streaming laws, the auto industry. Because if the trade agreement collapses, American car manufacturers suffer more than anyone. Carney traveled to Beijing. He negotiated what he called friendly nation trade tariffs with China, reciprocal tariff relief on canola, electric vehicles, agricultural products, not a free trade agreement, a targeted arrangement removing specific barriers that had been hurting Canadian farmers for years. Trump initially praised the move, said that is what Carney should be doing, then reversed course entirely within days, posted on social media threatening 100% tariffs if Canada becomes a drop-off port for China. But Carney clarified immediately. Canada is not pursuing a free trade agreement with China. The arrangement does not violate the trade agreement. It does not trigger the China clause, allowing the United States to terminate the deal. Dominic LeBlanc, Canada's trade minister, spoke directly with Jameson Greer, confirmed exactly what the arrangement is and what it is not. Greer understood the real impact of the China deal is not about canola or electric vehicles. It is about proving Canada can build trade relationships outside the United States, that Canadian farmers have options, that Canadian exporters are not permanently dependent on American markets for survival. Every alternative trade route Canada builds makes it easier for Carney to walk away from a bad deal with Washington, extend for 16 years, withdraw entirely, or trigger annual reviews, keeping negotiations going until the agreement expires in 2036. Most analysts assume Canada will accept whatever deal Washington offers because the alternative is worse. But that assumption was built on the old Canada, the Canada that sent 75% of exports to the United States and had no alternatives if Washington pulled the plug. Carney's Canada is different. The China arrangement creates agricultural export routes to the world's second largest economy. European partnerships are expanding. The Buy Canadian policy redirects $70 billion to domestic suppliers. Critical minerals give Canada leverage that did not exist 5 years ago because the United States needs them desperately to compete with China in clean energy and artificial intelligence. If the agreement does not get extended, annual reviews begin. That creates a decade of rolling uncertainty, but uncertainty hurts American businesses just as much as Canadian ones. The American companies that testified before Congress about how essential the agreement is, they are the ones who panic most when the deal looks shaky. Nearly 150 United States industry leaders told Congress the agreement must continue. Steel producers, automakers, energy companies, agricultural exporters, all of them watching Greer's demands and quietly hoping Canada does not actually refuse everything. But Canada is refusing everything. And the American business community is the first group that will pressure the Trump administration to come back to the table with reasonable terms. Before the demands were even published, Carney traveled to the World Economic Forum in Davos. He delivered a speech that rewrote the conversation about middle powers and economic coercion. He warned that smaller nations should never accept economic subordination from larger powers. Said, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. The audience stood and applauded. European leaders praised the speech publicly. Journalists called it the most significant address by a Canadian leader in a generation. Trump's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent responded within days, called the speech virtue signaling to globalists. Said Carney rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump message, and that is not a great place to be when you are negotiating with the largest economy in the world. But Bessent missed the point entirely. The Davos speech was not about antagonizing Washington. It was about building coalitions, creating a network of middle powers, sharing the same concern about economic coercion from great powers. Canada, Europe, Indo-Pacific, all listening to the same message, all looking for alternatives to dependence on a single dominant trading partner. Here is the contradiction at the heart of Washington's position. Trump calls the trade agreement irrelevant, said it offers no real advantages to the United States, called it transitional, suggested it may have served its purpose. But Greer told Congress the United States exported $960 billion worth of goods and services to Canada and Mexico under the agreement. That exports rose 56% since the agreement took effect. That the overwhelming consensus from American business and labor groups is that the agreement should continue. You do not spend months laying out conditions for extending an agreement you genuinely believe is irrelevant. You do not send your trade representative to Congress with a detailed list of demands if you plan to walk away from the table. Trump is posturing, playing the role of the tough negotiator who does not need anyone. But the data tells a different story. The United States needs this agreement, needs Canadian resources, needs Canadian auto parts, needs Canadian energy, needs Canadian critical minerals. Greer's demand list is not a list of things Trump wants Canada to give up. It is a list of things revealing exactly how much Washington needs Ottawa, and Carney is reading that list very carefully. Trump invited Carney to join his Board of Peace initiative for Gaza, then withdrew the invitation publicly on social media after the Davos speech, posted a formal letter uninviting Canada, called the board the most prestigious assembly of leaders ever. The snub made international headlines. Exactly the wrong kind of headlines for an administration needing Canada to sign a trade agreement extension in a few months. Because now, every time Washington demands something from Ottawa, the world watches a leader who was publicly humiliated by the President of the United States. Every demand looks less like negotiation and more like bullying. Every refusal by Carney looks like courage instead of obstinacy. Trump thought the Board of Peace withdrawal would weaken Carney politically. Instead, it made Carney look like the adult in the room, like a leader who refuses to be manipulated, like a prime minister who puts Canadian interests above the desire to stay in Trump's good graces. The refusal to accept 5 demands is not just a negotiating position, it is the culmination of months of quiet, methodical preparation. The China arrangement created agricultural alternatives. The Davos speech built international coalitions. The Buy-Canadian policy redirected domestic spending. Critical mineral strategies positioned Canada as an indispensable partner for American clean energy and artificial intelligence ambitions. Provincial governments aligned behind federal trade positions. The auto strategy brought Ontario and Ottawa together. While Trump was posting about governors in the 51st state and drop-off ports, Carney was building the infrastructure of economic independence. Every insult gave him political cover to move faster. Every threat justified another alternative trade route. Every demand revealed another Canadian advantage. The trade agreement review in July is not going to be a moment where Canada desperately agrees to whatever Washington demands. It is going to be a moment where Carney walks into the room with a hand that took 12 months to build. 5 demands, 5 refusals, and a country less dependent on the United States than it has been in 50 years. Trump needs this deal more than he will ever admit publicly. The American auto industry needs it. The energy sector needs it. Agricultural exporters need it. Tech companies need it. Nearly every major American industry that testified, before Congress said so on the record. Carney does not need it on Trump's terms. Not anymore. Canada has alternatives now. Real alternatives. Not promises, not plans, actual trade routes, actual partnerships, actual domestic policies redirecting money away from American suppliers. 5 demands, 5 refusals. And somewhere in Washington, American business leaders are reading the same news and quietly praying that someone in the White House figures out that demanding everything and getting nothing is not a negotiation strategy. It is a losing one. Trump wanted Canada to bend. Carney refused every single demand, and the trade agreement review is shaping up to be the moment Canada proves that saying no to the most powerful economy on earth is not weakness. It is the beginning of the end of American economic dominance over North America.